All right, so thank you very much for joining us today. This is our May offering of our monthly SISMA webinar. This is held by the Florida Invasive Species Council's Partnership Assistance and Communication Committee, or FISC-PAC, formerly the Florida Invasive Species Partnership. And so we work with all the cooperative invasive species management areas, or SISMAs, across the state, and we have 16 covering the entire state. And we're now under the Florida Invasive Species Council umbrella so that we can all work together at all the different scales that we need to address invasive species management across the state and across the boundaries. So for our presentation this month, we'll be looking and hearing about communicating with the public from Phillip Stokes, who's with the University of Florida's Public Issues and Education Center. Did I get that correct, Phillip?
It's pretty close. I'll
we can make sure it's right later.
Yeah, I'll say it again in a second. Yep.
Great. And then we'll get an update from the Beth Berg with the Keys Invasive Task Force and hear about other events around the states. And I'll go ahead and stop sharing and hand control over to Phillip now.
Great. Thank you. I will share my...
All right. If you have any questions, feel free to throw those in the chat box as we go through the presentation, and please don't forget to mute yourselves.
Okay. All right. Can everyone see it there okay? Good? All right. Well, once again, my name is Phillip Stokes. I'm the Education Coordinator with the UFIFIS Center for Public Issues Education in Agriculture and Natural Resources. No one gets it right. I don't get it right most of the time. So we go by the PI Center for short, as you can see why. Thank you so much for having me. Today, we're going to talk about tips for communicating with the public on topics related to invasive species, but really just in general, tips for communicating with the public and with an audience. I will just kind of go over the outline for today. First off, I do want to introduce the UFIFIS PI Center. Some of you may be familiar with it. Some of you maybe have never heard of it. And so I just want to tell you a little bit more about who we are and what we do. I'll bring up one previous research study that we did on invasive species, a public opinion panel from about 8 years ago now, but it'll be kind of fun to look at some of that. And then we'll talk about a couple models and theoretical frameworks to help understand attitudes and behaviors, things that guide our, like our behaviors. And then I'll give some practical science communication tips, things that you can do, things that you can implement in your work. So first off, what is the PI Center? We are the UFIFIS Center for Public Issues Education, examines how people think about, form, and act on opinions regarding complex agricultural and natural resources issues. I'll just talk about kind of the mission and vision, and then I'll kind of give an overview of what this really means. So the UFIFIS PI Center conducts and disseminates objective interdisciplinary research and educational programs to increase public understanding of and engagement in agricultural and natural resources issues. So basically, we are a research and education organization on the social science perspectives of ag and natural resources. Really, our vision and our mission is to kind of get a pulse on some of the perceptions, beliefs, opinions regarding ag and natural resources, as well as public health. We've been getting into a lot of public health and some of that intersection there as well.
Stay out of your way now.
So our process. So we kind of have 3 pillars, 3 legs to the stool. We look at research.
Phillip, sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
I don't know, maybe an issue on my end. I'm still seeing kind of the main introductory slide moving forward.
Thank you for telling me. Let me see. Let me stop share and do it again. 1 second.
It's not a webinar with at least one glitch.
Yes, yes. And you know, it's funny, I was telling Deb at the beginning, one of the roles that I do here is I lead webinars. And so it's funny being on the other side. All right. Let me see if this is better. Okay.
Yep,
Um,
I'm
okay,
seeing the
perfect.
research and this phone on the
Yeah, let me
left.
go back. Are you only seeing, you're not seeing my desktop, right? Just the PDF?
Yeah, I'm seeing the
Okay.
PDF.
So I won't go through this again, but this is where I was. So kind of our process is we're looking at research, communication and outreach, and education. So with research, I'll talk about some of those processes in a second, but education, that's kind of my leg of the stool. And so that's what I was talking about. I lead webinars and develop curriculum and things like that for the center. So with our research, we do quantitative and qualitative social science research. And some of the examples of this include public opinion surveys. So we'll send out surveys, national surveys or statewide surveys. Typically, we'll do this through the Qualtrics software. We'll do focus groups and interviews, and we'll do some organizational planning as well. So here are some examples of our past research. We've done a lot on COVID-19. We've done research on harmful algal blooms and aquaculture, the IFAS extension roadmap. So kind of a diversity in topics here. Our communication, really, we want to have deliverables from this research that help convey and make this research salient to the public and to our stakeholders. So we'll do that through issue guides, through communication toolkits, social media, news stories, and blog posts. And then education, typically our education is more non-formal, so we'll use things like course development, podcasts, webinars. We do video development, curriculum development as well. And I do want to mention, just to kind of round out a little bit more about the PI Center, we do have some partner centers. So the Southeastern Coastal Center for Ag Health and Safety, it's one of the CDC NIOSH Ag Health and Safety Centers in the US. And so our work is mostly with the outreach component of that, but it's based out of Gainesville, Florida. And it really looks at the safety of agricultural workers in our area. Florida Eden, the Extension Disaster Education Network, really looks at disasters. And then CRE, or the Center for Rural Enterprise Engagement, focuses on new media marketing techniques, typically for like ag businesses. But that's another partner program that we have. So kind of a lot going on, like I said, sort of a diversity in what we do. So I mentioned at the beginning that I wanted to give some previous research that we did on invasive species. This goes back to 2016. And so this was a Qualtrics survey. This was sent out statewide, went to probably between 500 and 600 respondents. And all of these respondents were weighted to the state census. So it was a general consensus of what the state feels around, the perceptions on invasive species. And so I just want to share some of those takeaways from this research panel and then get into some other pieces. So what did we ask 8 years ago? So we asked about levels of knowledge about invasive species in general, perceptions related to prioritization efforts and management practices for invasive species, perceptions of how invasive species should be controlled, perceptions of the importance of controlling invasive species, interest in learning about invasive species, and preferred channels for learning about invasive species. So I'll share a few of the takeaways. And there have been some changes in 8 years, right? I mean, social media is different, so maybe the way that information is shared has changed a little bit, but I'd be interested to see what you all think if when we look at the knowledge from the Florida public about invasive species. So on the left there, we ask them, what's your perceived knowledge in general? What's your perceived knowledge of the types of invasive species in Florida? And then what's your perceived knowledge on ways to prevent new invasive species in the state of Florida? And as you can see, it's pretty weighted to the left, to the not knowledgeable, slightly knowledgeable, or fairly knowledgeable. Not very much in the extremely or highly knowledgeable categories. But I think kind of the main thing to think about here is that there is a bit of a knowledge divide from experts and the public, which makes sense. I mean, not everyone can be an expert in everything, but there's certainly work, I think, to be done to increase the public's knowledge about invasive species. And hopefully today we can learn about some techniques on how to communicate them. A couple other pieces on that. A couple other takeaways: about 80% or more indicated that invasive species should be controlled to reduce harm to native species, humans, and agriculture. Those were the three highest topics that they thought it should be controlled for. Respondents thought that there should be something done for invasive species and not just left alone. And then when asked about what they were interested in learning about 2/3 were interested in the types of invasive species, half strategies for management, and then just over a third, I think it was about 38%, were interested in invasive species, the invasion process, basically. And so I think kind of a takeaway there is, as you're communicating with the public, there is that interest there, but trying to keep things more surface level, not quite as in the weeds. Save those conversations for like your close friends or your colleagues, but especially when you're communicating with the public, keeping it at least general. There was a question about the demographic information of the survey, laypersons versus scientists. It was the weighted to the general population of Florida. So it was not, so it was more the laypersons. So thank you, Jen, for asking that. And this is a published study, so I could always send it around. You could look it up as well. Okay, so next I want to talk about, before we get into like some practical tips, I want to talk about a couple models and theoretical frameworks to help understand attitudes and behaviors and sort of kind of how people make decisions, and what are some of the existing frameworks that kind of help us understand this and help us lead to behavior change. So the first one I want to talk about does not relate directly to environmental topics, but it certainly can be translated into an environmental topic. So the health belief model was developed in the early 1950s by social scientists to help understand the failure of people to adopt disease prevention strategies or screening tests for the early detection of disease. And I do think there's a lot of overlap. I find this when it comes to when we think about the invasive species curve, right? Which you're all very familiar with, I know, more familiar than me. Thinking about that prevention being, the best strategy for reducing harm, right? And so I think that is very translatable with health. And so this health belief model basically says that if people don't think something is not a problem, they're not going to do anything about it. So some of the pillars here of the health belief model are their perceived susceptibility to a threat, the perceived severity of the threat, the benefits of doing something, and the barriers to doing something. So the barriers could be, cost or a disruption in daily life or routine. The perceived self-efficacy is basically, someone's confidence that they can take an action to take a behavior to improve something. So you can kind of think about how this would relate to invasive species, especially when it looks at prevention. And of course, all of these kind of points here are changed and modified by the demographic variables as well as the socio-psychological variables. So you can look at those on the left, and they're going to influence the decisions that people make. And then the cues to action, basically that's, what are the motivators? What are the conversations that people are having? What are people hearing in the media and social media to really influence their actions on a particular topic? Another framework I want to talk about, probably one you're more familiar with, is community-based social marketing. And basically, this can be used to normalize behaviors in a social system. So if you want there to be behavior change related to something, this is a process that has been done. And this has been used in a lot of environmental type processes. I know even within IFAS, we've done some campaigns that have employed this community-based social marketing framework as well. But the idea, there's some overlap with the health model as well. But if you remove barriers and enhance the benefits of an activity, it will increase behavior change. So kind of the idea here is you select a behavior that you want to promote. It has to be something that kind of is non-divisible. It's something that you can target. And then you can identify some of these barriers that I mentioned. Things could be like, could be cost, could be, right, other disruptions. And then what are the benefits, highlighting those, then coming up with strategies, pilot testing them, implementing and evaluating. So this is a framework that, once again, has been successful in many different campaigns. Just put a couple sources there, an anti-littering campaign, a recycling, paper reduction, and environmentally preferable purchasing campaign. And so you could, of course, look those up. But the third thing I want to talk about in kind of a framework, if you will, is trust in science. And this is something that, we've done a lot of work at the Pi Center about people's trust in science. And so the idea here is scientific topics can be complex, right? So not everyone can understand everything about science. Even scientists in their field, really just know what they know, and they don't necessarily go outside of their field. And so trust in science is something important to know about your audience, because a lot of times people make decisions about scientific topics based on their level of trust. So for instance, I'll bring up, I mentioned we did some studies on COVID-19. And so people's willingness to get the vaccine or to adopt kind of this vaccine, to take the vaccine, could be influenced by trust in science. Not everyone can understand exactly what will happen. Not everyone would know. But if there is a general trust in science and scientists and the overall endeavor, they may be more willing to take the vaccine or do another behavior that, once again, is maybe complex, but as long as they sort of trust the process and believe that that's something that science is good, then that might be something they would be more willing to do. We have found in some of our studies that there is a difference in the levels of trust in science between urban and rural populations. And so, that's another thing you're going to want to keep in mind as well when you're communicating with a group. So now I want to get into some practical tips, some things that you can actually do that will relate to what we've already talked about. And so hopefully you can walk away and employ these in your work, in your conversations with your coworkers, your spouses, your kids, I don't know, in your life. So first off, when you're communicating with the public, with an audience, you want to ask yourself, who are you trying to reach with your message? When you're coming up with a message, you should try to keep it as targeted as possible. Trying to come up with a message that is general enough to just be, have the public adopt is not really all that practical. A lot of the work we do at the Pi Center is, we'll look at a concept, it might be harmful algal blooms or something like that. And so we will get the perceptions and kind of the knowledge levels around that topic and develop messages around that research. And so it's timely, it's related to the topic. And so that's kind of how we do our process here. But even when you're just addressing your audiences, just trying to change the way that you speak to each group based on who you're talking to. And so knowing that, you want to understand, what does your audience care about? What are the values and the core concerns of your audience? And in doing so, you can find some common ground. You may not think exactly alike your audience. You may think very differently, especially if you're talking about politics or something like that. But there's definitely common ground that can be found. And you want to create messages that relate to their values, not the value that you want them to adopt. I have a rug that is a rug now under the people, because there's a researcher at Wisconsin-Madison, Dominique Broussard, that has a quote, "You want to find a rug we can all stand on," which is kind of a fun image. If you can stand next to someone and actually find something in common with someone, that might be a good way to kind of help think about it. So this is kind of the practical way that you can think about it. Now, I didn't come up with this method, but I like it, and it comes from Spitfire Strategies, and it's developing a message box. And so I'll kind of go through the process of this. I'll tell you this: the concept of this is probably they're probably things that you've heard before. It's probably not going to be new information, but it might be the method and the process of how to develop this might be new to you. So first off, when you're developing a message to share with someone, you want to make sure you just select kind of one message and you stick to it. So I put just a quick screen capture of the podcast, Hidden Brain. I don't know if any of you listen to that. Yep. Okay. Thank you, Antonio. Yeah, it's really good, and there's a lot of useful information. It's a social science podcast, but in this particular episode, Less is More was talking about basically when you're trying to convey information, or even persuade people, for that matter, you want to stick kind of with the big points. So the examples they gave in this podcast that I can just talk about, they don't relate to environmental issues, but I thought it was just kind of a neat, kind of good example is whenever you're listening to those, watching commercials and about like pharmaceuticals, and they tell you at the very end of the commercial all of the side effects that they can have, right? It's kind of funny. There's, probably been SNL skits on this. But in reality, like for a lot of medication, there's always going to be, side effects. But most of them, if they're deemed safe, are going to be kind of the mild side effects, right? Maybe it could be fatigue or headache or something like that. Things that don't necessarily outweigh the benefit you're getting from it. But of course, in that list, they're telling you, well, it could be heart attack or stroke, or your limbs could fall off or whatever. And now you're thinking, well, maybe this medication isn't worth it. But in reality, even though the FDA requires that information, they're kind of diluting the pool with information that's very, very unrealistic, or that's not that's very unlikely, I guess. Another example they gave is in like a court case. There could be very influential evidence that makes for a case, but then there's less influential evidence, but it's also kind of going, maybe it's going against the defendant, but adding that will dilute the bigger piece of information there. And I'll give some examples of that as we go. But you want to stick to kind of one message. And within this box, we have values, barrier, ask, and vision. You don't have to, it's not a linear process. You can talk about these in a conversation or even a presentation in kind of any order. So the first one there is values. So you've kind of determined the message that you want to share. Now, going back to what I mentioned before, you want to think of some values. Think of the things that your audience believes in and that they kind of hold strong to. That rug that we can all stand on, right? This is where you want to find that. So identify, a value that you can both relate to. And I will give an example. It has to do with a cat, a cute, furry, harmless cat, right? Well, I probably don't have to, this is just a random example I came up with, by the way. I probably don't have to tell this group that cats can cause harm in urban and kind of in neighborhoods by kind of interfering with kind of the natural processes by, preying on birds or other animals. And it's typically recommended to keep your house cats indoors. And that's, of course, not accounting for feral cats. But if you're trying to convey this message to someone that believes that cats should be able to go inside and out, what is a value that you can all, come to, excuse me, and agree on? And that might be the health and well-being of your cat. So even though you might be more concerned about what they're doing and what kind of trouble they're getting into, something that you both agree on is just that you want the cat, you're looking out for the cat's well-being as well. And so keeping the cat outside, they're also exposed to, predators, whether that's dogs or other cats or foxes or diseases from mosquitoes and ticks and pathogens. So that could be something, that the health and well-being could be a value. A barrier, so something, this is addressing misconceptions. So people may not be aware of a problem. They may not be aware that whatever you're trying to tell them is actually a problem, or maybe they've been influenced or had misinformation about something. And so going back to our cat example, right? So now we have this mischievous cat, and once again, we might not want to tell them that, hey, the barrier might not be, hey, they're causing all this problem, but it might be like, hey, your cat can get really sick if they're outside. They can get beat up. This is kind of sad, but my cat growing up, when she was young, we let our cat go inside and out. I wouldn't do that now, believe me, but we did when I was a child. I wasn't calling the shots then, so it's not my fault. But sometimes in the morning, like she would be out all night and I'd open the door and she'd come in like pretty banged up because she wasn't a real big cat. And so like, that's not something you want your cat to go through. She lived to be over 20, so she's fine. But she was fine. But so that might be something you can tell them, hey, like there are some things that you need to be concerned about with having a cat outside. So the ask. So you might think, okay, well, the ask here in our example would be, well, keep your cat inside, right? But that might be too big of a leap, right? You're trying to share this message. You want to ask them, you want to have a call to action. But you want to do something, you want to ask them something that relates back to their values. So maybe you say, hey, next time you go to your vet, just ask them what they think about having a cat indoors and outdoors. Can you, ask them some of these questions about, the risks. And so that's a trusted source for them. And that's an ask that is not too threatening or, outside of their comfort zone. And then, so with the vision, you really want to echo kind of that value. So basically you're saying, if you do this, the vision here is you'll be better off, I'll be better off. It's kind of a win-win situation. And so, the cat is doing is okay. Taking a nap on the leather couch there. The other kind of actually, before I move on, I'll just say that this is a process, this is a practice that you can do in your own life, in your work life, and you can test it out, right? So like maybe fill in some of these things and then, look up public opinion data and see if the things that you're addressing line up, with the research, or test it out on some of your friends or your colleagues or your next presentation you give, and see if this is having an impact. The other kind of tactic, if you will, that I'll share is storytelling. I won't spend a lot of time on this. Once again, this is something you're probably familiar with, but in telling a story, you're eliciting an emotional connection. You're helping with information retention. There can be positive associations. People may not remember everything from the story or all the facts or all the numbers that you're sharing with them, but they may remember the way you made them feel. They may have that positive association with the story and your willingness to try to connect with them. So just kind of to summarize a few tips. So target your, I just got a pop-up from Zoom. Target your message as narrowly as possible. Don't try to create something that is a one-size-fits-all approach. Understand the values of your audience. Stick to one message. Develop your messages ahead of time. So using that values barrier, ask, vision, box approach. Tell a story and keep your cats inside. So let's see. And that's all I have. Like I said, some of the concepts that I shared are probably things that you've heard before, but maybe it was presented in a way that make it a bit more digestible. You can make it something that you can practice in your own work. If you have any questions, let me know. Hopefully you learned a little bit more about the Pi Center as well. But yeah, I think I'll turn it back over to you, Deb, and if there are any questions, let me know.
Great. Thank you very much, Phil. That was great. I learned a lot. I do have a question to start out. So looking at targeting groups very specifically, even if you're sharing it out on like a broader social media account, it's still good. I take it then to like get very specific. So thinking of one of the SISMA events I've seen recently was invasive fish roundup. So their messaging would be, targeting their local anglers, even if they're sharing it to the broader community. So it's fine to kind of share broadly, but still at the same time be very targeted in your message is kind of what I'm hearing, right?
Yeah, and I think anytime, remind me again, what was the example of? It was
It's an invasive fish roundup.
Roundup. Okay, so it was like an in-person
yeah, like a
event?
weekend-long event for
Yeah.
removing invasive freshwater fish, to be exact.
Right. Yeah, and so I think, understanding that whenever we're presenting in this scenario or sharing information, it's great to it would be nice if everyone would hear the information, but more than likely, we're probably just getting those audiences that kind of have a vested interest. And so this is probably a good example of that. So I think that would be good to target to that audience, like you said, Deb. But then also, yeah, make it general enough to where they could also teach that to their their extended networks, or it could be repurposed in another setting with the public, or another area. Yeah, I wouldn't. Keeping things, yeah, simple and direct, I think is also part of that. So I hope that kind of answered the question. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So we got a question from Antonio.
sure.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I liked it. I added on when I was looking at it, fun, making it fun, I think is something that's not as technical, but
Mhm.
a lot more people are more you wrote positive, but that's something that helps as well. I think that could get added on there. I wrote down like the target audiences, like you said, that would relate to what I do, what I'm dealing with. So what I'm looking at is that each one has their own purpose. So like, let's say we're trying to get site stewards to help with removing invasives. Well, that's going to have its own target audience. And then if we're trying to reach out to adjacent homeowners, right? That's going to have its own
Yep.
audience. So what I'm understanding is that you're going to have multiple target audiences. You're going to create multiple items that you're using for this, or like plans for each topic, right? You don't just have like one broad one and then you try to specify that one, right? Is that how I'm understanding it?
Yes.
Okay.
I totally agree with you, Antonio. I think that is the approach with this model. Yeah. Make a new one, make a new box, make a new message for each audience that you have, even if it's on the same topic. Like we talked about, every group might have different values. And you can get as fine-tuned and as specific as your groups allow it to be.
So what about like Instagram? So what about like social media posts? So if you have a page, um, maybe are you trying to target a certain audience for that page, or are you trying to make certain posts for target audiences? I think it's confusing.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think social media is one thing where you want to make it accessible for as many people that could have access to it, right?
Mhm.
So you want to make sure it's not overly complicated. There's not too much jargon. There's not too much text. There might be a place where they can click and find more information about it. Um, so I think making it general in that sense, but also, yeah, like knowing if you kind of know your general, who follows you on social media,
Mhm.
um, keeping that in mind also as you develop these things as well.
Okay, lean to who you have already there, lean towards that group. I get what you're saying.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
All right, do we have any other questions?
There was a question in the chat. I can read it. It says, does the Pi Center produce outreach materials that could be useful for land managers like us? For instance, information to public regarding the use of glyphosate, safety of using this herbicide versus public perception of danger. Yeah, so I mentioned at the beginning, like with some of our communication materials, we'll do like those one pagers. We call them issue guides. They're kind of like fact sheets. And so you can go to our website and kind of see what we have. As far as related to the topic of herbicides, um, public use versus maybe land management use, and glyphosate as a specific one. We don't have anything on that particular topic. But yeah, so we don't have anything on that, but we do have, I guess, some other kind of general things related to ag and natural resources, but nothing related to herbicides right now.
I have one last question. So are there any places where we could go to or any resources that you think are valuable for trying to find out the values of different groups to make sure that we're targeting things properly for people?
Yeah, I think there could be a few different methods for that. I think you can't disregard conversations and just reaching out and developing connections with people, face to face, phone calls, whatever. And so, obviously you're not going to be able to talk to everyone, but I think if you know kind of who you're reaching out to, and I think that develops trust. Trust is a big part of that as well. So that could be one method. Going to the literature, there could be more out there than you might think about some of the social science data, or you can find things that are relevant enough. And so I would say those are things. Go to your colleagues who've maybe been in the industry for longer than you, and see if they have any input on that and what their experience has been as well.
Okay. We've got another question or come in the chat. Someone's asking if there's going to be a part 2 to this covering some specifics for people who already have negative mindsets about invasives. And I can say we don't have that on the schedule yet. That is a great suggestion, and that might be something actually, Philip, I don't know if the Pi Center might be interested in kind of looking into that for us at some point soon.
Sure. Yeah, no, I'll definitely kind of share that out with the group. That is a challenging thing to face, right? Because when we think about, I kind of touched on this, but I didn't say it specifically. You have kind of your values, and then the things that you hold true, that you believe are like, almost like your faith, and the things that are core to you. And then you have your interests, the things that you just want to see happen. We want to see a good thriving population, or something. So it's addressing values versus interests is kind of a way to think about that. But yeah, no, I'll definitely bring that up.
Antonio?
Okay, so I was thinking about going, if we can even do this. I think Scott's on here. We were thinking about going to a reptile show, trying to get a booth at a reptile show to talk about how it's bad to release your invasive reptile. So basically what I'm saying is, what do you think about going into the area that is the source, kind of in a way, of the problem, and trying to go right into it and starting to, politely just educate straight into like the heart of some of where the issues come from? Is that like I don't know. I've been thinking about it, and I just was thinking what you would think about that.
Well, sorry, that was a question for me.
Yes, I'm
Yes.
sorry.
Okay.
You
Um,
understand?
yes, I do.
Okay.
So I think that's a cool idea. I'll just say that. I think anytime you can bring, you know, an educational, um, I don't know, an event like that where you're actually having the reptiles. I know I've just here on campus at UF have seen, some of the tegus and things, and yeah, they're pretty gnarly looking, right? And so I don't personally understand like the need to, the exotic trade. It's just I don't know. I would want to hear from all of you on that. It's kind of baffling to me. So I think, yeah, I mean, hopefully, if you could show them and have some of this like face-to-face interaction with the actual animals, I think that could be cool.
Well, yeah, what I was going with was that, like, let's say those problem issues, like she said, the people who were negative mindsets on invasive, or who have positive probably mindsets on invasives, people, basically people who like them, right? Who want
Right,
them,
right,
going straight to where they all meet, and then try to make a booth there and try to educate right in the heart of it. That's what I'm talking about. It's like you're going into
right.
the worst place where people probably don't want you, but then there's a lot of people who are just getting introduced there. They're not necessarily on one side, they're just getting new into it, and they're being introduced or influenced by everyone around them that are doing it probably incorrectly
Can
in
I
some ways.
speak to this? I don't, can I speak to this really quick? This is Megan Ellis with FWC Landowner Assistance Program.
Yeah, hey,
Can
go
y'all
ahead.
hear me? Hi. I actually used to be the Gainesville Herpetological Society president for a couple years, and I also worked with Chase Pirtle at Ashton Biological Preserve. We did a lot of outreach events at places like that. In fact, Chase probably still goes to those today. There's usually a couple a year that we would attend and do outreach at those events. We'd also do outreach at the Elephant Appreciation Day event every year, and places like Luby Bat Festival and several other conservation groups as well. But we would do outreach at those events to talk to people, and I really encourage y'all to really open your mind to the perspectives that folks at these events might have. They're not all just wanting to release their animals into the wild. You know, there's certainly people that are conservationists that also have exotic reptiles. I'm one of those. I only have two, but I've been a part of that community in the past, and I do encourage y'all to kind of keep an open mind when you approach these venues as what you might perceive as the other side, because oftentimes there's a lot of people with more similar opinions than you would expect, and going into it with that approach of a curious mindset of what other people are thinking and what they believe and what they care about will open you up to a lot more ways to actually guide them to maybe a more conservation focused mindset than approaching it as stepping into a place where no one agrees with you. And that's just from my experience. And like I said, I probably attended, I don't know, 10 or so events like that during college, and also had my own reptile out for several outreach events around Gainesville. But anyway, I just wanted to speak to that regard, in that I have been part of that community in the past, and I'd be happy to connect you to some resources that and maybe some people that would be happy to get out there with you.
Thanks,
Hey,
Megan.
this is Scott Tedford, and I appreciate that comment. And I've actually been trying to get in touch with some folks specifically for the West Palm Beach reptile show, and I haven't been successful basically having anybody get back with me. So if you do have a contact or a resource that I'd be able to reach out to, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Absolutely. My email, I can't text it in the chat right now, but my email is Megan, MEGAN .Ellis, ELLIS @myfwc.com. And anyone can email me, and I'll be happy to connect you with some folks that would be able to assist with that.
That's awesome, Megan. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Megan.
You're welcome.
Kind of about that back in, it makes me think of what Philip was saying about trying to find a rug that we can all stand on, and making sure finding those common grounds. And also made me think too of your example of the feral cats. And so what messaging could we use for the pets, and thinking about, instead of your pets would be damaging to the environment, maybe thinking about the pet's health and safety once it's released, and how it's not really going to have that happy of a life. So I see there's a lot that we learned from today's presentation. I think that could apply to this particular situation, as well as a lot that we're doing. Do we have any more comments for Philip before we move on to our next section on the show, or questions? That was fantastic. Thank you very much, Philip.
Sure thing. Thank you all for having me. Yeah, feel free to reach out to the Pi Center or to me. I can put my email in the chat. But I appreciate you having me on today.
Thank you. All right, Beth, are you still with us?
I am. I'm here. Can you hear me?
All right. Yes, I think you should be a co-host and should be able to go ahead and share.
Share my screen.
Share.
Okay. And thank you, Philip. That was great. Okay. Mine's quick. I'll keep you under the 2:30 deadline here. All right. Hopefully you can see my screen now. Yeah, okay.
Yep.
So I'm giving an update for Florida Keys Invasive Exotics Task Force. We are also known as the Florida Keys SISMA. We were established in 1996. I think we were the first ones. We were the first SISMA in the state. So we kind of predated the IPM money and all that. We started as just a group of land managers that were getting together to talk about invasive exotic species and management issues on our properties. So here's just a brief summary of kind of our active members in the task force. Monroe County, of course. I'm sorry, I should introduce myself. I'm Beth Berg. I'm the land steward for Monroe County, and I am co-chair of the Florida Keys Invasive Exotics Task Force. So we also have U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which is like the refuges in the Keys, the QD Refuge, Croc Lake. We have the village of Islamorada. We have Naval Air Station Key West, which has a lot of natural areas on the Naval Air Station property. City of Marathon, Florida Keys Electric Co-op, FWC, the Florida Keys WEAs are down here. And of course, Florida State Parks. We have several state parks, Lignum Vitae, Curry Hammock, Bay Honda, and so on. We have a very active membership, so that's great. Just a little brief summary of what we do: meetings, trainings, and work days. We hold virtual meetings about 3 or 4 times a year. We started these during COVID as virtual meetings, and because the Keys are so spread out, we have kept them going, which we find the benefit is, one, we get speakers from all over Florida to join us without them having to travel to the Keys. And 2, we get a lot more participation from our team members by doing it virtually, because they don't have to give up half their day to drive to Marathon or something, you know, to commute to the meeting. So we've had good success with that. We do herbicide training with a focus on natural area certification. We do exotics ID trainings. I should give a shout out to Janice Ducanel, who does all these trainings. She is the district biologist for our Florida Parks District 4 down here. And then we also do approximately 4 work days per year working on partners projects. The photo here was taken, I think, in February or so, where we were working on a lead tree removal project next to FWC's property, which was adjacent to the Florida Keys Wild Bird Center. So for this talk, I thought I would focus on kind of our education and outreach materials that we produce. I knew that Philip was going to be talking about, you know, kind of something similar. So the first one I wanted to talk about is our list of invasive plant species. So when FISC comes out with their list every 2 years, we then update our list. We meet after they complete their list and we review ours and we make changes to it. So we have a list that is specifically for the Florida Keys. So obviously things that are a problem up in North Florida or even Central Florida might not be a problem for us. So as you can see, we have the information related to the species. But the most helpful thing I think on here is the eradication recommendations that we've included for land managers to address the species on their properties. This is another page of it. I wanted you to see that we put in red our EDRR species to kind of make them pop out and draw attention to them. And then in the notes, we also include like where it could be a problem. We all get together and we add our own comments related to where it's an issue. One category that's kind of specific to the Keys are native species that are special concern due to regional impacts in natural areas outside of their historic range in the Florida Keys. So a good example for this would be the mahogany. It's native to the upper Keys, but in the lower Keys, especially on Big Pine and the Pine Rocklands, it can cause a problem. So we're just kind of trying to raise awareness that some things that are native to South Florida or the Keys may be a problem when they're outside of their normal habitat. So after we do the list, we then update our guide. This is an identification guide for invasive exotic plants for the Florida Keys. It was originally created by Nature Conservancy staff. I think it was like 2001, maybe, that it was first created, but then we've updated it we missed some time with COVID just like everybody else, but we normally update it every 2 years when we update our list. So for each species that was on our exotics list, it has a page in the guide, a page with pictures, a page with treatment, origin, all sorts of information, ID information. So it's a really helpful thing. We actually give it to a lot of our contractors and people working on conservation lands and keys. One cool section is we've included natives to know, natives that could be easily confused with exotics. So for instance, barbed wire cactus could be easily confused. This is barbed wire cactus here, could be easily confused with Hyloceras. So we've done like side-by-side comparisons, and if I can go back, let's see, previous. On these sheets inside the guide here, it has a spot where you can put similar natives. So it kind of will direct people, like, go look at this similar native in the back of the guide. So these are just some example pages from the natives to know section. And then another thing that we produced several years ago is something called the Alternatives Planting Guide. This is like, it's a big binder that we take to public events like Earth Days or community outreach events, and it's like a tabletop thing that people can view. But if you open the guide up, it has in yellow one of the invasive exotic plants, and then it has alternatives, native alternatives to what could go in that same spot that plant is occupying in the landscape. So for example, this example is the yellow elder is the exotic, and then we always have 3 examples of natives that could take its place. And finally, I just wanted to mention that this is not related to exotics, but the Monroe County Environmental Resources Department has just produced this landscaping with keys native plants. It just came out in January, and it's a really great resource. Sorry, I just took a photo. I couldn't find the PDF copy, but I took a photo of it, as you can see. But it's a really great resource for like a homeowner to choose native plants, and it gives a lot of information on the type of plant it is, as far as canopy or understory, so on the location, whether it's appropriate for the upper or the lower keys, status of the species, so on and so forth, whether it's a butterfly plant, whether it produces flowers or fruits. Here's an example of just an example of the guide. And that's my contact information. And I would direct you to our Florida Keys Invasive Exotics Task Force website, the SISMA website, but not yet. Deb showed me how to do it at how to update it at the FISC conference, and it's one of my summer projects, but I plan to put all of these documents available on our website, but it hasn't all been uploaded yet. But if anyone is interested in getting a copy of any of these documents, you can contact me at that information that I put up on the screen. Thank you.
Thanks, Beth. Those are fantastic resources, and great way to highlight all the work that your SISMA is doing, and especially to tie it into this month's topic. I'm going to go ahead and share real quickly. I just have a couple things to share before we end our meeting today. All right, so you guys should be able to see the upcoming events now. We're getting into summer, so of course it's full fieldwork season and getting nice and hot. So we're starting to kind of fade out from all the different events all the SISMAs are doing at the moment, but there's still a lot of great things going on across the state. Also, too, we have special badges within EdMaps for the Florida Invasive Species Council, tying into our symposium theme of the Guild of Invasive Assassins. You have a chance to earn those over the next year. We have a couple cool grant opportunities that are available. One is in just a few days. One is 6 weeks or so. So you've got some chances if you've got some projects that you need some funding for. We've got a lot of great calls continuing through the rest of the year, starting to look over the next couple months at some invasive animal issues. And of course, this call and all of the others are up on our YouTube channel. So you can you'll be able to see this and any others there for free. Want to thank again both Philip and Beth for the great presentation. And we are right at 2:30. So hope everyone has a great month. Stay cool and stay hydrated.
Thanks, Deb.
Thanks, everybody. Great presentations.
Thank you.